What a beautiful morning for us to gather together and worship and praise. My name is Chris Watson. I'm the pastor here, one of the pastors here at Golden Hills, and welcome you this morning to come worship with us. Wanted to let you know of a couple of announcements before we get started. First of all, January next week, going to start some discipleship classes. Want you to know about. There'll be a membership class and Knowing Jesus that's going to start next week. And then also later in January, there's going to be a civil conversations class, Discovering the Trinity class that's going to start at the end of January. So check out the email for more information and to sign up, and you can go to the website as well. Global Outreach Ministry Partner Highlight. We were told back in November that this was going to happen. Each month, we'll be highlighting one of our global partners around the world spreading the gospel. So check the email, how you can pray for Mary, who is serving in Thailand. So I am the Community Outreach Ministry Pastor here at Golden Hills. We have a Community Outreach Center located in Antioch with the purpose of reaching the vulnerable, reaching the poor, reaching those that are struggling with the gospel. And there are many in our society, many in our culture, many where we live that are struggling. And the Golden Hills supports a ministry designed specifically to reach those. And so how we do that through a number of different outreaches. One, we have an after-school program that we target at-risk young people, at-risk youth, at-risk children. We have vans that go into neighborhoods and pick up kids, bring them to the COC. We're able to invest in them, really we're able to show them a life outside of the chaos that is normally takes over their lives. And so we're able to do that. And minister to at-risk children and youth. We also have a coffee ministry, a coffee house ministry, the Bistro, where we have free coffee for people. They come in. If it's cold outside, they can come in and get warm. If it's hot outside, they can come in and cool off a little bit, where they can just relax and kind of put their guard down a little bit. So we have an opportunity to build relationships and share the gospel through those relationships, those connections that we have. We have a visitation ministry where we go out and we target those that are lonely, those that are sick, those that need some encouragement, and we're able to minister to them through that. We have a resource and referral outreach where people are able to come in if they're struggling with a physical need, with a spiritual need, with something that's just burdening them, they really can't get a kind of a grasp around it. They can sit down with one of our ministry partners and be able to kind of sort things out and get a plan together as they go forward with that. We have an international prayer meeting through Zoom that we do once a month. That's we're able to pray with not only about our city and the ministry that we have here, but also partner with people throughout the world and find out what's going on in other parts of the world, how they're dealing with pandemics and government and all the issues and stresses that are going on in there and join together to pray. And then also something that we've just started a couple months ago has been a shower ministry. To restore some dignity to the lives of people that just have no place to get clean and to wash off the filth and the gunk that builds up. And so all these are designed to help us to love on people the way Christ loves on them. And so we have been able to continue the ministry at the COC throughout the last 9 months, 10 months, through our wonderful staff, through our faithful ministry partners, and through the Lord who has, praised the Lord, we've been able to continue and continue to show love to people. And that's been a wonderful testimony to God's goodness through us. So normally what I would do is I would invite you to Friday nights. We have a dinner and tour that we do at the COC, and I'd invite you to come. And if you're interested in finding out more about the COC, interested in being involved, you can come and take that tour, have dinner with us. You can see the ministry in action, see what God is doing, and kind of find out your place. But unfortunately, with a lot of things through the pandemic, things have changed, and so we're not doing those. However, what we are doing is we're doing individual tours. So you can call the COC and you can schedule to have a tour with me or with Pastor Gary. We'd love to bring you, show you around, see how things are running, and maybe find a way that you can connect and be involved. So kind of keep that in mind as you're looking for opportunities and ways to serve the Lord in what God, how God has given you. So one of the things that's a conviction of mine is that all believers, all of us, are called by God to use our gifts, our talents, our abilities, our skills. Whatever we have, we are to use that to serve the Lord for His purpose and for His glory. Unfortunately, far too many times I see Christians that are wasting the abilities that God has given them. They're wasting the time that God has given them, wasting the relationships, and not accomplishing what God has set forth for them to do. So I think the call to worship, the call to salvation and the call to service are together. I don't think they can be separated. Sometimes we try to separate them and say, okay, well, I'm called by God for salvation. He's taking care of that part of my life, but my time and my money and my resources and my talents and those things I'm going to use in this over here, and we don't really combine the two. But I think the call to worship, the call to salvation, and the call to serve the Lord are together, and we can't separate the two. There's a couple of passages I want to look at as we look at this idea that we are called to serve, that each believer, every one of us, has a calling on us to serve. I want to share a couple passages in the New Testament. First of all, if you consider the way that when Jesus first called His disciples, the first disciples He called were fishermen. He called Peter and Andrew and John and James, and they were fishermen. And as He called them to come to follow Him, as He called them to be His disciples, He said to them, I will make you, come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And I think that the idea of being fishers of men is that we have people out there that we need to invest in. We need to be salt and light into the world. We need to find ways to invest in people that God has placed around us. And of course, Jesus was using the idea of their profession, their occupation, of their job, in order to show them what His calling was in their life. And I think what Jesus is saying to them is, with the same intensity, the same passion, the same skill, the same knowledge, the same understanding, how you study to be a good fisherman, that's the effort I want you to put into making disciples. That's the same effort I want you to be a fisher of men. And I think that call for those first disciples that Jesus brought in, I think it's the same call for us as believers now, those that profess to follow Jesus. And then also, look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5. If you have your Bible, I think that the 5th chapter of 2 Corinthians is a great passage as it talks about our calling, as it talks about what we are to be, how we are to live as believers in this world, as we are to live out the calling that God has placed upon our lives. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, beginning of verse 17. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to Himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to Himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making His appeal through us. We implore you, on behalf of Christ, to be reconciled to God. And so as we look at this, we see the motivation that we have as believers for reaching others, for sharing with others. We have right there in verse 17, the old things that passed away, we are no longer the same as we were before Christ came into our lives. We are different. We are fundamentally different. Our interests are different. Our focus is different. Our mission, our purpose is different. We have a purpose to follow the Lord because we are new. We are different, essentially, because of what Christ has done in our lives, how He came in. And what did He do specifically? Specifically, He reconciled us to God. The Bible talks about that before we came to Christ, before we were in God, we were separate from Him. We were distinct. We were on one side and God was on the other. We were enemies of God. The Bible describes us as enemies of God. But through Christ, we have been reconciled. We have been brought together. We have been joined together. Two opposing parties are now together. And that's only happens through Jesus Christ. So if we've accepted Jesus, if the salvation that we have through Christ has come upon us, then we are no longer enemies of God, but now we are called friends of God. Now we are part of God's family. We are children of God. We are sons and daughters. And so what does that mean for us? Well, it means for us that we now have this ministry of reconciliation, meaning that we now have the obligation to take what God has done for us, as He's made us a new creation, and share that with those around us. so that God can do the same thing in their lives as he did in our lives. So God's desire is that all men would come to him, that all men would call out and accept the salvation that's freely offered through Jesus Christ. And how does that come about? He chooses to use those who have received this great gift of salvation to go out into the world. And so we are reconcilers. More than that, we are ambassadors. This passage calls us, we are ambassadors for reconciliation, meaning that we are representatives of Christ. We represent him into the world. So, furthermore, this is kind of explained a different way if you want to look at 1 Peter, towards the end of the New Testament. And kind of the same idea that Peter talks about, but he talks about it in kind of using a different language. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. 1 Peter chapter 2, 9 and 10. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Again, talks about our life before Christ and our life now. Once we were not a people, once we didn't belong, once we were just strangers and aliens, but now we have a mission. Now we have a purpose. Now we have a God who watches over us. Once we were in darkness, but now we're in light. Now we have seen. Now we've got the revelation of God in our life. And so what does that mean for us? It means now that we are, in verse 9 it says, not only are we a chosen race, but we are a royal priesthood. Now that term royal priesthood is a designation that's not just talking about some professionally called out clergy or some super set class of Christians. It's talking about all believers. Every one of us are called to this ministry of being a royal priesthood. Now, what's a priest? I mean, we look in the Old Testament, we see that in ancient Israel, that the priests were those that represented God to the people of Israel. They were the ones that were called out to offer the sacrifices, to be the representation of God into the lives of the people of the Old Testament. And so in the New Testament, with the New Covenant, those of us who belong to Christ, those of us who have given our lives over to him, that's who we are now. We are now the priests. We are now those who will go into the world as God's ambassadors, as representatives for Christ, bringing reconciliation, just testifying about what God has done in our lives and how he has made a difference for us and how he can make a difference for others as well. So we have a great responsibility. We have a great mission. We have a great purpose. But how do we live that out? What does it look like to do this when you have a family at home, when you have pressures of the job, when you have all this stress, anxiety going on? How do you live this out in real time where we live? And so we're going to look at an example. We're going to spend the rest of our time today looking at Mark chapter 2, looking at an example of how we can do this in context of living out our daily lives. And so we're going to look at the example of Jesus. So Mark chapter 2. We're going to see here in Mark that Jesus had a purpose, he had a direction, he knew where he was going, he knew what he was doing, and nothing was going to deter him from that. In the same way, as those that are called by him, as those that belong to him, we have a purpose, we have a mission, and we can't allow anything in this world to deter us from the purpose that he has for us. In Mark chapter 2, beginning of verse 13, talking about Jesus, he says, he went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at the table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinner." And so, as we look at this passage, as we look at Jesus, we're where do we see him? What is he doing? First place we see him is he is at the seaside, right? He's on the sea, and he's looking at the sea. So what do you think of when you think of the seashore? When you look at the seaside, what is it that comes to your mind? I think if you were looking over the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus was at this time, and you looked over the sea, I think you would see a bunch of fishing vessels. Fishing was a big industry. You would see the boats, you would see the fishermen casting out their nets, looking for that big catch to come in for the day. It was a big industry. You would see the cleaning of the fish, the taking care of the boats, the markets where they would sell the fish. All that would be something. It was a place of industry. It was a place where people went to work. When I think of the seaside, of the beach, I'm thinking more of a recreational time, right? I'm thinking of going out having a good time. I'm thinking of playing in the water, swimming, laying on the beach, reading a book, sunbathing, playing football, volleyball, boating sports, all kinds of fun stuff. Place where people kind of go to relax and unwind and have a good time. But what do we see Jesus doing when he's at the seashore here? We see him doing what? We see him teaching. Why was he teaching? Because that's what he came to do. He came to impart truth. He came to bring about a message of hope, of life, of light, bringing out of the darkness and light into this world. And so we see that Jesus here went to where people gathered. He had a message, he had a purpose, and he went to where people were. It was no coincidence that he was at the seaside, because this is where people would naturally gather and congregate. This is where they would be in order to naturally live out their lives. And Jesus was where the people were at. As a man with a mission and purpose, we see that Jesus intentionally went to a place where he would have contact with individuals who could benefit, who needed to hear the message that he had to give. He went to where they worked, where they rested, where they relaxed, and where they naturally gathered to socialize. As a people called by God with a mission, as we have a mission, we have a message, it would benefit us to think about, where is it in our context? Where is it in our world? Where is it in our community where people gather together to work? Where people gather together to relax and to socialize? Where is it that people go together to have fun and play? Where is it that people recover from the busyness of the week and socialize? I'm not talking about showing up like a county fair with a Jesus poster or going someplace and handing out tracts, but being present in a way where we can build relationships that would lead us to getting to know people in a way that we could share with them the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. If we want to represent Christ and touch people with the life-changing gospel of the message of Jesus Christ, we need to plan to intentionally meet people where they're at. And I think that's what we have Jesus here doing, going to where people were at. Not waiting for them to come to him, but him making the effort to go out to where people were at. And then, where's the next place that we see him after he's at the seaside? We see the next that he's passing by the tax collector booth, going to see this guy named Levi. And, Jesus was very intentional. He's very strategic about where he went and why he went. And so it wasn't an accident that he just was kind of strolling by and came across Levi's booth. I don't know about you, but I don't know how often you just kind of find yourself going by the IRS. Most people avoid the IRS as much as possible, but that's where intentionally Jesus went, because he wanted to see this man named Levi, because Levi had a need in his life, a need that only Jesus could meet. So what do we know about this guy named Levi? Well, we know that he is also known by the name of Matthew. So he had two names. His father was named Alphaeus. We know his profession. He was a tax collector. We also know that he wrote a book of the New Testament, one of where we get some of the most information we know about Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. But a tax collector in the time of Jesus' days were a group of people that were really despised. They were despised by society because they were Jews who were looked at as sellouts. They did not follow the traditional path of upstanding Jewish man. Basically what they did is they sided with the Roman Empire. Now because the Jews were living in a place that was dominated by a oppressive force, Rome. And so these who were tax collectors were Jews who were designated by Rome to collect taxes for their purposes. And so they were looked at as kind of traitors, kind of Benedict Arnold type people. Not only that, but they were allowed to kind of take a little bit more off than they were supposed to. And so it's kind of a way of making a little bit more money than you were supposed to. And so they were really looked down upon. And in the religious circles, they were religious outcasts, where the Pharisees and others would call them sinners and would designate them in this way. They were treated like religious outcasts. A lot of times they were designated as sinners, and they were identified with people like harlots in that time. So you could see that it would be a big deal for Jesus to go out of his way to go to Levi's booth and offer this call for him to come and be with him. A proper, upstanding young Jewish man would not associate with this type of person, this lowlife, who spent his days in opposition to the values and traditions of mainstream Jewish people. But in his typical countercultural way, Jesus saw beyond the corruption and greed, beyond the immorality, beyond the depravity of Levi, and he offered him a new life that consisted of peace, of joy, and of hope. Jesus was not concerned about how talking with this sinner would affect his reputation, how he would be perceived by religious people of the time, the religious leaders, or even the pushback that he would receive from maybe some of his friends or family. But he saw a person in need of the gospel, and he extended an invitation to follow me, a simple invitation. Come and follow me. I have something for you. I have what you need. You know, the world advertises that we can obtain joy, peace, and hope in obtaining more material possessions, in more entertainment, and self-gratification. However, these things will always lead us to wanting more and never being content. Jesus' call to Levi is as relevant to him as it is for us today. And look at Levi's response. He had an enthusiastic response. It wasn't so much that he he was able to leave everything that he had. In Luke chapter 5, we have an indication of kind of a little more to the story as Luke's encounter of it, as he recollects it. He says that Matthew left everything he had and followed Jesus. And it was a big deal for him, because not only was he leaving his job, but he was leaving his identity and his livelihood. It was a big deal for him to follow Jesus at this point, because unlike some of the other disciples of Jesus' time, fishermen could go back to fishing. Other people maybe go back to their professions, but a tax collector could not go back to being a tax collector. I mean, those jobs were very highly sought after, because it was a way of getting rich quick. And so when Matthew left that, he was leaving everything. He was giving up everything. He enthusiastically followed Jesus and left him. And so we see that this was a big deal for him. It was a big deal for Jesus to go to him, but it also was a big deal for Levi to leave everything he had to follow Jesus. So as we look at this, as we see that he is doing, that Jesus is going to him and making this call available, he then, Levi is so excited, so on fire, seeing what Jesus has done in his life, that what's the first thing he does? He goes out and he throws a dinner party. He goes out and he invites his friends, and he says, come, I want you to come, and we're going to have dinner with this guy who has done something great in my life, something incredible for me. And so he invites these, we're called sinners, and other tax collectors into this meeting where Jesus would come to them. And as Jesus goes there, notice what he does is that he sits there and he eats with those that were not really on the same on the same class as Jesus. They were considered outcasts. They were considered not really part of society. but Jesus went to where they were at. And notice what Jesus did. He didn't invite them. He didn't say, oh, no, that's okay. Why don't you come to where I'm at? Why don't you come to a kind of a neutral location? But he went into the circle that they were at. He went into where they felt comfortable, these friends of Levi. He did that because he wanted to, because for Jesus, what was most important is the message that he had. And he wanted to present the message in a way that was going to be listened to and understood by those he had contact with. In order for that to happen, he wanted to put them at ease. He wanted to make them comfortable. And so, as I see, many of us, many Christians, are willing to invite people to church or invite people to a place where we feel comfortable. And then when somebody maybe rejects our offer to come to church, or maybe they say, oh, I'll come at some point, but then they make excuses on why this week's not work and why I can't make it. We get discouraged or say that, well, maybe they have no interest in God. When the reality may be that they are not comfortable. They are scared. They have no confidence. They don't know what to do at church. They don't know how to react. And so in order to eliminate that, Jesus went to where they were at. He went and intentionally went in a way that would make them at ease, at comfortable, because the message that he had was so important. So there's a concept in sports that you're probably familiar with called home field advantage, which means that the team that is at home, the team that is hosting the game, typically has an advantage. Why is that? Because they're familiar with the field, they're familiar with the stadium, they're familiar with the surroundings. Their pregame ritual is the same, right? They can sleep in their own bed, and the fans that are there are typically cheering for them. However, somebody who is visiting, coming in from the outside, they don't have those advantages, right? They're typically traveling, sleeping in a bed in a place that they're not comfortable with, and they have people booing and jeering at them rather than having the home field advantage. And so Jesus gave up that home field advantage, that home court advantage, in order to make people feel comfortable, so that he could spread the message that he needed to do. He went around and he hung around people like Matthew, like these tax collectors, people that you would not expect him. So what does it look like to follow the ways of Jesus? So we see the reaction of people here in this account. We have people that, first of all, we have Matthew, right, that enthusiastically followed him. We have his friends who wanted to do him. But then we have another group as well, a group that's of these religious people, of these Pharisees, of these scribes. And what are they doing? They're kind of sitting back, and they've got their arms crossed, and they're saying, went to Jesus' disciples and said, your master here, what is he doing? Why is he talking with these tax collectors? Why is he talking with these sinners? Why is he talking with these people that there's no hope for, right? There's no reason for him to be around them. What's he doing? What's he trying to prove here? Was a criticism of what Jesus is doing. And so we have these three groups, right? We have the Matthew, who's all aboard. We have these ones that are listening to Jesus, and then we have these religious people. And I think you would expect that the religious ones would be the ones that would be wanting to hear what Jesus had to say, right? They should be interested. They cared about the Old Testament. They cared about the Bible. They cared about what God was doing. But yet their reaction was totally different. The reaction was they couldn't believe that Jesus would be around these kind of people. But I think that with the question that I think comes for us today is who are we more like in this story? Are we more like Matthew and his friends, or are we more like the Pharisees? Now, before you ask, think about this, that those who claim to follow Jesus need to do the things that Jesus did. And so what did Jesus do? Jesus hung around tax collectors and sinners, was around people that were not really the people that kind of the world would look at and say, why are you around them? They can't do anything for you. They're not really worthy of your time. But Jesus went to them anyway. And so if we're going to claim to follow Jesus, we need to do the things that Jesus did. And so in your life, can you think of anybody who is a Matthew type in your life? Can you think of somebody that the world will look at and say, well, we don't really understand why you're investing in that person. Why are you loving that person? They can't do anything for you. Is there anybody in your life, is there any group of people that you can point to and say, there's a Matthew in my life? And if there's not anybody like that, then what does that say about you and me? Does it say that we're more like the religious Pharisees than we are like the people, like Levi, who would follow Jesus and do whatever for him? My encouragement to you is to find somebody that you can bless, somebody you can spend time with, somebody that you can point to Christ in a way that the watching world may say, that's kind of strange. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems odd. But I do want to point out that we need to be wise about this, because Jesus is not really at risk of having the tax collectors and the sinners rub off on him. He is influencing them, and he's not allowing them to influence him. So if we get into a situation where we are trying to build relationships with those that are these Matthew types, sinners and tax collector types, but they're rubbing off more on us, we're becoming more like them than they are like Christ, then maybe that's not the best situation for us to be in. Maybe we need to find somebody else. So an example of this would be somebody who's an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, if you struggle with alcohol, then going into a bar and ministering to those that are at the bar is probably not the best place for you. Because we all have weaknesses, and if that's a weakness for you, then going and putting yourself in that situation would not be wise. So look for ways, look for opportunities that we can make an impact on people around us. And if you're not sure that you're making the impact or that you're being impacted, then you may want to find somebody who's maybe a little wiser, somebody who's maybe a little stronger in the faith, and talk to them and have them pray with you about that. And if you conclude that this particular group has a pretty good chance of influencing you more than you have on them, then maybe find a new Matthew to love on and invest in the way that Jesus does. But I think most of us are not running the risk of being influenced by Matthew types. My guess is that most of us don't have Matthew types in our lives, and the point is that maybe we should. Are we following the ways of Jesus, or are we criticizing the ways of Jesus? And so Jesus looks now, as this question is raised by the Pharisees to his disciples, it gives him an opportunity to respond. It gives him an opportunity to make a profound statement on the gospel. And he says that in verse 17. And when Jesus heard what they were saying, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." It's not the healthy who need a doctor. A call to salvation requires an acknowledgement of our need. There has to be a need for us in order to receive salvation. In order for us to come to Jesus, we have to have a need. We have to recognize that there's a need in our life. There's no indication that Jesus went to sinners because they gladly received him, but it was rather because they were sinners. In the same way that a doctor goes to somebody who's sick because they need to be healed, they need to be cured, Jesus goes to sinners because they need what he has to give them. They need the grace, the mercy, and the forgiveness that only Jesus can offer. The irony here is that all people are sick in the way Jesus describes. You know, Jesus went out of his way to perform miracles. He healed lepers. He healed the blind. He healed people that were sick. He healed paralytic. He was casting out demons. He even rose the dead. He did all these things for people that were sick. And now he's telling us that he's here for the spiritually sick as well. So it's kind of like the coronavirus. You know, one of the experts tell us that one of the dangerous things about the coronavirus is that even if you have no symptoms, you can still be a transmitter. You can still spread the disease, even if you don't think you have it, even if there's no indication that you have it. You can be asymptomatic and still spread the virus. And so there's a lot of people that think that sin has no effect on them. The religious people that were here in this dinner that were seeing Jesus and were asking questions of his disciples, they didn't think that sin had affected them. They thought that they had effectively rid all sin from their lives. But Jesus was showing them that they still have the wrong attitude. They still had the wrong approach when it comes to this. And so as people try to deal with sin, we all know that it's there. We may try to deal with it in different ways. Some people try to stuff it down and ignore it, pretending the sin is not there. Other people just dive right in and they live it up. They're just going to enjoy the sin as best they can. And others try to remedy it, like the religious right. They try to think if they do enough good things, if they were able to provide the religious works or good deeds, that maybe they can overcome. But Jesus is saying here that in a way that we're all in need. Ritualistic religious behavior is inadequate, will not overcome the need that we have, that only Christ can answer. Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. God says in Hosea, he says, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings." So the people in Hosea's time were doing the same thing. They were coming to God. They were doing the things that the law prescribed, but their heart was not towards Jesus. It was not towards God. Their heart was still on their own desires, on their own way of thinking. And God is saying that's not adequate. You cannot do the things that you want to do and just come to me with a sacrifice or an offering. I need your whole heart. I need everything to be dedicated to me. So what are the sacrifices that we have today? We don't sacrifice bulls or rams or anything like that. But what are the things that we try to give to God in order for these religious rituals to take place? Well, we have heartless church attendance, insincere worship, and meaningless prayers like before meals and the like. Any repetitive or pattern behavior done outwardly to try to please the Lord without addressing the sinful appetite that we have on the inside. Through Hosea, God said that the apostates of Hosea's day, though continuing the formal ritual of temple worship, they had lost their center. The shell, the outside was trying to clean up, but the inside was still hollow. So I think what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees there at that dinner, and maybe to some of us this morning, is that if you do not have a need, if sin is not an issue for you, if you think that you have all that you need to handle your problems, then maybe the gospel is not for you. If you think of yourself as righteous, holy, and devout, if you're attending church to make yourself look good or to have some kind of outwardly appearance, if you give a heartless sacrifice of maybe a couple hours to God a week to try to earn his favor, then Jesus will not provide ultimately what you're looking for. However, if you are broken to the core, if sin has destroyed your life and you're tired of spiraling out of control and you desperately need a connection with someone who will bring spiritual healing, then the gospel will change your life. Not in order for us to return to a lifeless existence in which you strive after wealth, popularity, and recognition, but rather to endeavor to make Jesus known and to live for him. So, the question is, have you fully embraced your role as a servant of God? Do you see yourself as a fisher of men? Do you see yourself as an ambassador for Christ? Do you see yourself as a reconciler for lost people in this world? Does this form your identity? So it's not just a function that you may perform, but it's essentially who you are. Do you see people who are engaged in sinful and wicked activity as fundamentally different from you, who can never change, or people who are spiritually sick and need to be healed by the great physician? Are you willing to go out of your way to meet, love, and engage with people who may be labeled by modern-day Pharisees as sinners and those who are beyond hope? So where are the places that you might go to meet undesirables in our society? I'm not talking about going to maybe dangerous places, but places where people would gather to work, to play, to rest, or socialize. How can you strategically and intentionally put yourself in a position to be used by God to love and to care for the vulnerable, the hurting, and the broken? It's not easy, but it's needed in our wayward world. And if you can't think of a place where you can do this, if you can't think of a place where there are people who are gathered, who are needed, I happen to have a place where you can come. We have a community outreach center, and every day we have people that are coming to us that are broken, that are struggling in many different ways. We have some that are addicted to drugs and just can't break the habit. We have others that are are broken in so many ways. We have people that are dealing with social anxiety, dealing with mental issues, dealing with physical issues in so many different ways. We have many that have been hurt, have been abused, are coming out of horrible backgrounds, and just need somebody to love them, somebody to point them to a God who can heal them, can bring them lasting healing in their lives. And so I'd love to be able to talk to you and let you know of opportunities where you can use your gifts and talents to serve the Lord, to invest in people that would love. It's kind of like when Jesus said, I kind of feel this way, when Jesus said that the harvest is white and ripe unto harvest, but the laborers are few. It's kind of how we feel sometimes when we have people coming and sometimes the laborers are few. And so if God is calling you to ministry, we'd love to talk to you more about that. But sometimes I think that maybe this message, as I was preparing this and thinking about this, that maybe this would have been more appropriate a year ago. Because the whole idea of going to where people are congregating, where people are meeting, is a touchy subject for folks. In fact, when ministering before the Lord, we need to be sensitive to those that we are seeking. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 said this, as he was looking at being for them. He said in verse 19, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jew I became like a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not myself being under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those who are outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some." For the Apostle Paul, it was his desire that he would do whatever it took to put himself in a position to make the gospel known. So if he were here today, in the year 2020, I think it might look something like this. He might say something like this: "For the mask wearer, I would wear a mask. To the socially distanced, I would socially distance. And for those deeply troubled by social injustice, he would be sensitive to the racial issues that are in our society, in order that some may come to hear the gospel and ultimately be saved." So for me, I wouldn't want somebody to be turned off by my political stance or by my social stance, because and block being able to spread to share the gospel. We want people to be turned off by the gospel. If they're going to reject it, we want them to reject the gospel, not to reject who we are. Paul understood who his identity was. He was a child of God, and he knew what his mission was to give hope to the lost and to share the gospel. Now, I realize that there are many that feel our freedoms are being compromised by some of the government mandates and reaction to viruses and things like that. And they feel a conviction to make a stand and fight for long-held liberties that they think are being in jeopardy. And if that is you, I would encourage you to exercise your right as an American, to voice your opinions and to make your arguments known, because we would not have the freedoms that we enjoy in this country if it weren't for brave men and women that did this for us. However, remember that above our nationality, that you are first and foremost a child of God. Your citizenship is in heaven, and you're only an American for a short amount of time. So whatever your role, whether you're a patriot, a soldier, a police officer, an accountant, a father, a husband, a grandmother, a social or a community organizer, that is secondary to your calling to serve Jesus, which is first and foremost. But of course, Jesus didn't have to deal with a pandemic, right? He lived in a completely different world without a highly contagious virus that's seeking to take life and limb. Well, actually, in Jesus' time, there was a very horrible disease that had existed for 1,000 years before Jesus. In fact, it's still present in our world today, albeit we don't deal much with it in the United States, but in third world countries, they still deal with it. So how did Jesus deal with those with leprosy? This ailment was so nasty and infectious that there are sections in the Old Testament that are designed just to tell the people how to deal with those that have been infected, so that the rest of the people don't catch this horrible illness. I would encourage you to look at how Jesus treated those with leprosy. Study those passages where he ministered, where he healed, where he interacted with those that had this highly contagious and horrible disease. They were, and the people that he was ministering to were considered infectious and unclean. He took precautions, but he understood that what his purpose was, and he did not allow anything to deter him from accomplishing what God had placed upon his heart. So with COVID, it might be difficult to meet people as we see here in the life of Jesus, just because of where we are and what's happening. But two things I want you to keep in mind. First of all, that COVID will not last forever. That this is going to pass at some point. But hopefully our attitude towards reaching out to those around us with the gospel will be of utmost importance, so that we will put ourselves in a position to provide the antidote to the spiritual ills of those we come in contact with. So whether COVID's here or whether COVID's not, we know that we have a mission, we have a purpose placed by God. Secondly, if you look in Mark chapter 2, just before the passage that we looked at in the verses 1 through 12, you'll see that there is 4 men who came with a seemingly insurmountable odds that were in their lives. They had a friend that they wanted to get to see Jesus, but they couldn't get there. There was obstacles that were blocking their path. And so they came up with this plan of getting on the roof and lowering down. You know the little story of how he lowered him down to see Jesus, so the paralytic was there and Jesus healed him. And so sometimes it takes us thinking outside the box. It takes us looking at things a different way. At the COC for the last 9 months, ministry has looked very different than it did before that. We've had to adjust. We've had to reimagine. But the purpose, our mission has been the same, and that has not changed. Here at Golden Hills, our mission, our purpose has been the same, to preach the gospel and to make disciples. And the different ministries have had to adjust, have had to be tweaked in order to keep people safe, in order to comply with the mandates that are placed before us. But the mission, the purpose going forward is the same. And so for us, as the people of God, for us that are called, for those of us that are experience the salvation of Jesus Christ, we have to continue to go forward. We have to continue to press on. We have to continue to live out the mission in our lives, even if that's going to look differently than it did before. Even if it looks differently than we think it's going to look in a year or 2 years from now. But God has placed that upon us, and we need to be people that are convicted, people that are convicted with that purpose that God has for us. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time we've had to look at these passages. I'm thankful for the salvation that you provided for each one of us. Lord, I pray that those that are here today who have not made the commitment to give their lives to you, Lord, those that are trying to deal with their sin on their own strength and power, that they would see the futility of their best efforts and wholly accept your sacrifice, because that is the only hope that we have. What an awesome promise you have given us, that beyond this life, we have glories that are unfathomable, that those are waiting for us who trust you. However, we know that you have called each believer to serve you. There's a mission before us, a mission that is too daunting and difficult to be done on our own. So we ask you to empower us to accomplish what you have set before us, that we would have the courage and confidence to boldly proclaim to a lost and dying world the transformation that you have made in us. There is hope, there's joy, and there's peace in the midst of this evil world, and we are your ambassadors. You've chosen to use us to be reconcilers, to bring this message to those we come in contact with. Lead us to a place where we can have a mission, where we have a desire to meet people where they work, rest, socialize, and gather, so that we can make an impact for your kingdom. Give us the right attitude. Fill us with your loving compassion for the vulnerable, for the needy, and for the sinner. And please do this in a way that will point people to you, and so that you will receive all the glory to your name. Amen.